Hello, everyone. My name is Rira, and on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our double feature with Mary Cecilia Jackson, the author of Sparrow, and Brandy Colbert, the author of The Only Black Girls in Town. We're so grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their books to our community during this uncertain time. Before I properly introduce our guests, I would like to make some announcements and go over some housekeeping rules. So our next Vroman's Live event is scheduled for tomorrow, May 13th at 6 p.m. with author Ruthie Thorpe, who will be presenting their book, The Knockout Queen. For regular updates on upcoming events, please feel free to subscribe to our newsletter and check out our website as well as our social media handles. This evening's event will end with a Q&A. To submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you see a question on the list you'd like for our speakers to answer, you can vote for it and it will come up to the top of the list. And we will try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Also, please consider supporting our bookstore by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured books. Just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer's screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. And we do have a limited number of signed book plates for those who are interested in getting signed copies. So if you are interested in that, just make sure to write book plate in the comment when you're checking out your purchase. And also some good news, our bookstores on Colorado Boulevard and Hastings Ranch are now offering curbside pickup, and we are accepting online orders. So yay. All right, with that out of the way, let me introduce our guest speakers for this evening. Mary Cecilia Jackson has worked as a middle school teacher, a technical writer and editor, a museum docent, and a development officer for Central Virginia's PBS and NPR stations. Her first novel, Sparrow, was an honor recipient of the SCBWI Sue Alexander Award and a young adult finalist in the Writers League of Texas Manuscript Contest. Joining her is Brandy Colbert, the award-winning author of several books for children and teens, including The Only Black Girls in Town, The Revolution of Bertie Randolph, and the forthcoming The Voting Booth. She's also the co-writer of Misty Copeland's Life in Motion, Young Readers Edition, and her books have been chosen as Junior Library Guild selections. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Mary and Brandy. So sit tight and relax and enjoy the presentation.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming. I think I'm going to start, if that's okay. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Sparrow and how the book came into the world and a little bit about what it's about for those of you who haven't read it yet, obviously. Sparrow is the story of Savannah Darcy Rose, who is called Sparrow by her friends and family. She is a gifted 17-year-old ballerina who suffers physical abuse at the hands of her boyfriend. And in order to heal herself, she must confront the abuse that haunts her past and try to fashion a positive future for herself in spite of her grief and pain. When I began Sparrow, I was struggling with the first draft of another young adult novel, and it wasn't going well at all. And while I was trying to come to terms with the fact that I am awful at world building and would never, ever be a fantasy writer, a terrible news story went viral. A high school girl had gotten drunk at a party and passed out. And while she was unconscious, a group of boys took pictures of her naked and posted them on Facebook. I was so horrified by the cruelty and the depravity of those boys that I felt sick for days. I couldn't sleep. And when I did, I dreamed about that girl. I couldn't stop thinking about her. I wondered if she had a supportive family, if she told people who loved her and whom she loved. I wondered how she felt when she woke up and figured out, what had happened to her. So I wondered also if she actually talked about it and got help, or if she just sort of stuffed it down deep inside into that place where she wouldn't have to look at it too closely and could pretend that it never happened. I've always kind of been drawn to stories about men and women who have been traumatized and either silenced themselves or have been silenced by others. So after another sleepless night, I got up before dawn one morning and I wrote the first line of the first draft of Sparrow, which is, "I am not the kind of girl who tells." And just one other thing before we get to anything, questions and things. I'm the mother of 3 sons, and I'm super passionate about creating brave and vulnerable male characters. Boys who love deeply and often secretly, boys who are fierce, fierce allies for their friends, and boys who sometimes walk in the world without ever showing anyone their own broken hearts. And so I created Lucas, who is Sparrow's best friend or closest friend and dance partner. And he is the second point of view character in the book. So that's kind of how Sparrow came into the world, Brandy. I love your book.
Oh, thank you. Your book, I was telling you earlier in the green room, that it's just such a powerful debut. And, you know, like you, I've kind of been drawn to writing stories about people who are, you know, going through trauma and trying to process, you know, that after traumatic events. So it was definitely the kind of book that I like to write and like to read. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll tell you all a little bit. This is my first middle grade novel, my 5th novel. It's called The Only Black Girls in Town. And it's a kind of self-explanatory from the title, but it's about a girl named Alberta who is 12 years old, and she's living in the fictional town of Ewing Beach, which is set on the central coast of California, which is one of my favorite areas of California. And Alberta is not the only Black girl in her town, but she is one of very few and the only one in her grade. And so she just has never known what it's like to have a friend who really kind of looks like her and can, you know, experience the same things as her and relate to those things. So then at the end of her summer, right before she's about to start 7th grade, a family buys the bed and breakfast across the street, and one of her dads tells her that it's a Black family, and she's like, what? And they have a daughter your age, and so she just can't believe it. So the new girl who moves in is from Brooklyn. It's her and her mother. Her name is Edie. And Edie is a lot different from Alberta. She is a goth girl from Brooklyn. She's very street smart. You know, she's from the city. And she moving to this sleepy little town in the central coast of California. She's like, what is this? Like, what is this surfing? I don't do that. So she and Alberta have not a lot in common. But then when Edie finds these journals in the attic of the bed and breakfast, which is also her bedroom, of course, because she's a goth girl, she involves Alberta in sort of this mystery that they launch into to find out who wrote the journals. So it's sort of a little, I guess, dive into the past, not quite a history lesson because they don't want to teach any lessons, but they dive into the past to try to figure out who wrote these journals from the 1950s and 1960s. And, you know, they sort of start figuring out that they might have a little bit more in common than they thought, and try to get to the bottom of that, all while going all the typical angst of, you know, middle school and 7th grade and friendships and periods and all of that. So, Mary, I know we have some questions from the audience, but I have a few questions I ask myself. There might be a little overlap, but we'll get to those soon.
Okay.
So I wanted to start out and say, like, I love ballet so much that my first book was a ballet book.
I know.
And I love ballet books. So of course, when they were like, have you heard of Sparrow? And I'm like, no, but I want to read it immediately. So excited when that came across my radar. So I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about how you came to write a ballet book and what experience you have or research you did to really make it so realistic and bring us into that world.
Okay, sure. The short answer to that is that I love ballet. When I was in middle school, I was taller than everyone in my class. I had super thick glasses. That hasn't changed. Super thick glasses, braces, you know, pimples. I was kind of a hot mess when I was in middle school. I was also deeply, deeply shy. And in those years, my father took me to see live performances of ballet. And obviously I was too tall to be a ballerina, which I would have loved to have done, but I'm 5'10", so on point, I'd be a monster, right? Sitting there in a darkened theater with my dad and watching that magic unfold on the stage, you know, the beautiful settings, the gorgeous choreography, the music, I was just mesmerized, and I fell in love with that art form. And so it's something that I've loved all my life, ever since I was a kid. I did a lot of research, obviously, on ballet when I was writing Sparrow, by which I mean I watched a lot of ballet on YouTube. I watched a lot of rehearsal videos. I also watched videos of young ballerinas like 13 or 14 years old who dumped out their dance bags onto the floor and showed us what they had inside. And that was important because when Tristan, the boyfriend, and Sparrow meet, they actually literally collide in the parking lot, and her dance bag goes flying all over the place. And so I knew what would be inside that. So I did that research. And I also went to the San Antonio School for Performing Arts and talked to the head ballet teacher there. And she did, I met with her because I wanted to make sure I got the ballet scenes right. And she was in her bare feet, but in her leotard and her dance skirt. And she did fouettes for me in her bare feet, really slowly in slow motion, so that I could see the mechanics of that spin and learn what mistakes ballerinas make when they're learning to do them. And Sparrow does fouettes at night when she can't sleep. She gets up and she does fouettes, and fouettes are a crazy difficult spin, or kind of a pirouette, but really hard. And so that was important for me, and that was a real trip to talk to a real ballerina. So that's what I did.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel a little better knowing that you didn't study ballet either, because I didn't either. And I always felt like people expected me to say like, oh, I took ballet forever, you know.
I know. Yeah, no.
Tapper.
Not happening.
A few ballet classes, but it is so difficult. Like you said, the fouettes, it's just, I mean, unreal.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
It is. Okay. And then I'm going to ask you another question before we get to the other questions.
Okay.
I feel like not that many young adult books cover a lot of stuff, but I feel like not that many really dive into abusive relationships among teenagers, even though it's a very real issue that unfortunately a lot of teenagers go through.
Right.
So what made you decide to take on a subject that so many readers and writers might consider kind of taboo?
That's a great question. I've been interested in the cycle of abuse and how sometimes women and men who are abused as children either turn out to be abusers themselves, or they become involved with just another form of their childhood abuse. And I sort of was interested in how the abuse that she suffered early in her life had an impact on the kinds of relationships she found herself in when she's 17. And though she's fictional, I have had friends who have been in difficult relationships like Sparrow. I did a lot of research on domestic violence. I did a lot of research on teen dating violence, which sadly is on the rise in this country. I visited a crisis center for battered women, and that was an incredibly sobering experience. It was, as I said, a crisis center. So women show up to this shelter at all times of the day and night, often with their small children in tow. They're all badly, badly frightened. And when I was there, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement that said that if I heard their names spoken out loud, I would not reveal them. And that shook me up so badly. And it's heartbreaking to me. It's heartbreaking to me that anyone goes through this, men, women, and violence like this, domestic violence. What I learned is that it happens in big cities, small towns, and it doesn't matter what your gender is, what your ethnicity is, what kind of a background you have. It happens all across the board. And I have always found that to be heartbreaking. That was something, sometimes you write about the things that frighten you and upset you and keep you up at night. And that's what I did with Sparrow.
Yeah. And, I mean, it can be really difficult to write about topics like this. And, especially to portray them really honestly, those are the really ugly parts, to have to put those on the page. So thank you for writing something like that.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I ask you a question about your book?
Please.
I think that the gift of your book is that you've created these characters that are so tenderly and compassionately drawn that we feel pain when they feel pain. I mean, when Alberta and Edie were feeling all the things they were feeling, we feel that with them. And I just wanted to know if you could speak to how you created those characters and where they came from.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's such a compliment. Yeah, I really writing characters is my absolute favorite. I don't know. I really love. I'm really fascinated by people in general. Especially people who are different from me. I really kind of love getting into their head and trying to figure out why they do the things they do and what would make them react this way, which would be different from how I react. Alberta and Edie are really not super different from me. They're not me. I share with them, of course, that I was once a 12-year-old Black girl, and I know a lot of the things they were going through, but I hadn't really, I guess, seen any, shouldn't say not any characters on the page that it looked like me or gone through my experiences, but really the idea for their story popped into my head when I was like, well, what would happen if you were the only Black girl in your town and then another one moved in across the street, was my premise for the story. Because usually character comes first, but with that, it was really kind of this jumping off point for the story. I've known that I wanted to write about sort of that experience of growing up feeling like the only one, because, I grew up in the Missouri Ozarks, which is about 2 hours north of the Arkansas border, for anyone who doesn't know that geography. And, it's a pretty white area. And I was a kid in the 80s and a teenager in the 90s. And there just were not, I mean, it was about 3% Black there when I was growing up. So I was not the only Black girl in my town, but I was one of very few. And especially in my school, often I was the only one in my grade. And so just often it felt like I didn't have anyone to really talk to who knew what I was going through. I had my parents and my family, but, even my extended family and my cousins weren't growing up. They were growing up in much more like areas that had many more Black people than I did. So they didn't quite understand. So yeah, I think it was just kind of getting back to the heart of what it felt like to be a 12-year-old, which I really didn't remember. So the whole time I was writing, it's like what a 12-year-old sounds like, it talks like. But once I got going, it was really kind of easy to get back into that mindset. Like I remember the summer before my 7th grade year, I don't know what was in the water, what happened, but like felt like there were a million friendship fights and like, my group of friends, I got into like this group fight with these other girls. It was the time of like landlines. So we were just like constantly calling and hanging up and calling and just all this drama. So it was kind of like remembering those times when, things were really huge in your life, even though other people would not look at them that way. And also not having that kind of freedom that you have as a teenager, even, you're still reliant on your parents for a lot of stuff, and you aren't really able to make that many decisions for yourself. So yeah, I think it was just kind of going back to how I felt and then trying to like look at what, tweens and 12-year-olds are going through today to get to the heart of those characters.
You do that so beautifully, the way you talk about how the girls are feeling that everything is happening at once, all the big things are happening at once, and it's just too much. And I do have one other question. The story within the story is so profound when they find the letters. Where did that come from? That was just such a brilliant idea. It's not a history lecture, but wow, what a profound impact on a reader.
Thank you. Yeah, so I wanted them to sort of, I don't know, I guess the older I get, the more interested I am sort of in history. I, as a kid, did not think that I thought I hated history, because it was really sort of that experience where, you learn about a few wars that, happened hundreds of years ago and don't have a lot of impact on today, even though obviously they do. And then I just remember really strongly every year feeling like, oh, we're going to get to the chapter on slavery and then civil rights, and everyone's going to look at me because I'm the only Black kid in here. And then just felt like there were only like 4 things that we talked about, like, you know, slavery, like maybe a paragraph on Reconstruction, and then, you know, Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and that was like it. And so as an adult, I realized I love history, and actually I love learning on my own and getting to sort of research and fall into these rabbit holes of history that I didn't feel, you know, probably didn't really even have access to as a child, and was certainly not being taught in school. So I'm really interested in that time, kind of the 50s and 60s. My parents grew up in rural Arkansas in the 50s and 60s. And, you know, they don't talk a whole lot about their lives back then, which I completely understand because it can be kind of painful. But in doing more research and looking back into that time, I thought, what would it be like to live then? And what would it be like to live in the South? And, you know, wasn't easy.
Yeah.
So without giving too much away about the story, I just really wanted to examine what it would be like, especially for, well, I guess I can kind of say this, it happens early enough. The woman in the journals that they find is passing as white, and passing for white. She's a Black woman from the South. And so I'm kind of fascinated by that concept also. You know, how bad would your life have to be to shed your race that, you know, you were born as, and to start over completely and know that you had to sort of leave all of that behind and start this new life, and knowing that a lot of people aren't going to agree with that, or that they might find out and, you know, stop talking to you, or so just so many issues and problems around that. I really wanted to explore that and then sort of juxtapose that historical experience with what it's like to grow up as a 12-year-old, you know, in the year 2020.
Well, it's brilliant. It's just beautifully done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we've got some questions here, so
Okay.
I think we should dig into here. Okay, we have 4 votes for this one.
Okay.
So from Joe Thistle says, what is a dimension or attribute you unearthed about one of your characters only after you'd gotten into the writing of the book and written in his or her voice? That's a great question. Tackle that one first.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Joe. You know, so what happened? I'm going to talk about Sparrow's mother. Because I'm not sure, Joe, that this is going to exactly answer your question, but it's the answer that you're going to get. Joe is a family member, so but seriously, Sparrow's mother, and I think I can allude to this a little bit. Sparrow has a very difficult childhood. She has an abusive childhood, and Sparrow's mother is a scary character. And in the early iterations of the book, I kept her off the page a lot. And I would say probably during the first 10 drafts, she was off stage, you know. And so what happened to Sparrow was sort of, we knew it was in her past, but I didn't write a lot about it. And then the last set of revisions, my editor and I decided that she needed a bigger role and that I needed to flesh her out some more. And so diving into that character a little more, I mean, I had her sort of an outline of how I knew she would have behaved, but then sort of getting into what her motivations might have been or how frightening she must have been to a young child. That was something that developed along the way that I wasn't expecting to do. And the other thing that that changed some was the assault scene in Sparrow, where Tristan, it's a pretty brutal assault scene. And that took a long time to write. And it was really, really difficult. It took about a week for me to write that. And I wrote it and then I edited about half of it out because it was more impactful, shorter. You know, it's one of those less is more kind of things, you know, and I tend to overwrite things, you know, I just like keep hammering something home. Like if one thing is good, I'm going to give you 15, right? So, so that was something that changed and developed. I don't know, Joe, did I answer your question? I think I probably went off, but that's what I do.
I think that was a great answer. I will say for me, I'm going to go ahead and answer it too, just because I can.
Good, please.
Yeah, I think with me, because I don't outline at all. So do you outline, Mary?
I didn't. I think with my next book, I will. I outlined towards the end because during revisions, I had to do an outline because they were massive, and just to get my arms around them, I needed to outline. But no, I didn't. I'm a total pantser.
I am starting with you. I kind of like outline when it comes like down to the end, and I'm like, I've got to get organized. But I don't outline from the beginning, so a lot of things are a surprise for me. One of them was sort of how Edie's relationship with her dad progressed, because her parents have just separated in the process of getting a divorce, and she and her mom moved across the country. And so a lot of things I don't put together consciously as I'm writing, and then I'll reread it or look at it, months after I'm done and say, oh, well, that happened because of this. And so when I was 12, my parents were getting a divorce. And I haven't really been able to write about it yet. I've tried so many times to write about it from the main character's perspective, and I just can't do it yet. So, even though that was like 30 years ago, but it's just one of those things that feels very, it's painful. It's still raw and really fresh. And so I feel like I kind of delved into that, like her, really missing her dad. And even though my dad was still a great dad, he was around and we lived in the same town and all of that, it was just trying to sort of capture that feeling of what it feels like when your parents just split up and like everything you thought that you knew was true is maybe not quite true. So that was something that surprised me.
It's a great answer.
All right. Let's see. We have more questions. So kind of already answered that one about the research or preparation. Okay, this was one of my questions for you, Mary. So what was your favorite thing about the process of writing this book?
The whole thing, and I say this all the time. I love the whole process of writing. Writing first draft for me is pure torture, but I still love it, which makes, I think that sounds kind of weird to be in that space of sort of being alone in your study, in your office, that silence, that creative space. And for me, it's not a matter, and I don't think most writers I know do not wait for inspiration. You don't wait for that beam of heavenly light to come down and the angels to sing, and you get these fully formed thoughts and you put them down, and that's not like that. It's just, you just got to gut it out some days, right? For me, the inspiration comes in the actual writing. So the actual act of writing the book is so joyful to me. Even the hard parts, maybe especially the hard parts, because when I get through it, I think that's not bad. We can, that's something that I can work with later. So the whole experience of writing Sparrow, even though it is about a difficult topic and there are some hard scenes in there, was probably the most joyful professional work I've ever done in my life. Not just writing it, but also working with my editor, Susan Chang, and revising. I love revising. There were days where it was, how it is, it's just awful some days, but because every draft is better and better and better. So that's why I just love the whole write. I just love being a writer, and so it was all good.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
I completely second all of that. So even down to the revising, I don't know. I think when I'm drafting, I say oh, I hate drafting. I just want to revise. And then when I'm in revisions, I'm like, what is this? I wish I could just start the story, But there is something really rewarding about revising and just seeing thing come from kind of a messy, first draft and ideas that don't necessarily gel to this cohesive thing that has a
Yeah. And what's really hard is, so having Sparrow finish, and I forgot to hold it up at the beginning, so here it is. I think that the hard part right now for me is having Sparrow finish and having this, it's got a beautiful cover and it's revised and it's perfect, and and then starting with the first draft that it's just garbage right now, just total garbage. So it's hard not to compare what you're doing now with what you've done in the past, I think.
Yeah, it's really hard. And I have to say, I don't think it gets any easier. I mean, I think like the last book I wrote, or last two books I wrote, I was literally Googling, how do you write a book? Like, so I don't
That's
know.
so encouraging, honestly.
Yeah, every book is different, but I don't know if it gets any easier.
Yeah.
It's always
Well,
enjoyable, but yeah,
that's good advice.
not necessarily easy. All right, I'm looking at these other questions. Ooh, I love this. Oh, this one is from friend Erin Entrada Kelly, Newbery award-winning author Erin Entrada Kelly asks, is there a genre that you love to read but have no interest in writing?
Fantasy. I love fantasy. I love it, love it, love it, love it. I just finished, last year, I read The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. It's like 9,000 pages long. It's like this big. I mean, it's huge. And I read it twice in 1 year. It was so fantastic. I love it. If there's a book with a map and a dragon, I'm all in, but I can't do it. I tried to write a fantasy and it was horrifyingly bad. I mean, so terrible. So yeah, I would never, ever try to write fantasy, but I love to read it. What about you?
Yeah, I love that question and the fact that you're like, yeah, I tried it, not for me, but I'm going to read this 9,000 page book.
Exactly.
For me, I feel like I'm kind of a boring reader. I really read a lot of contemporary realistic. I read I like historical fiction a lot too. That might be something that I say I would never try it, but I'm actually already kind of writing it. So
Yeah.
True. I guess I would say the closest would be like magical realism. I love it so much. I love to read it. It really connects with me in a way that like sometimes I can't suspend the disbelief when it comes to sort of fantasy novels. I very much respect the genre and the craft of it. But I think magical realism, it feels very accessible for me. And when I'm reading it, I believe it, just like the character.
Me too. Yeah.
Happening to them is happening. It's just part of the world. But I think if I ever like sit down to write it, I'm just like, this is like, I can't suspend the disbelief of my own writing for some reason. I just can't get there. So yeah, but
same.
I love that question though. Let's see. I've got more. These are such great questions. Well, let's see. Okay. What is an idea or an emotion that you wanted to put into your book but couldn't quite make it work and might be saving for your next book?
That's a really hard question. Yikes. I don't know. I'm trying to think. In Sparrow, there's so much emotion. There's grief and regret and humor. I think maybe Lucas is funny though. My boy character, my male character, I think he's kind of funny. So I don't know that there is an emotion that I didn't write in Sparrow because it's kind of, there's a lot in there, and I'm sure I'm blanking out. I'm giving a rotten answer to this question, but I can't think of one. Can you?
Not at all. It's hard when you write emotional books anyway. Yeah, I think when you mentioned humor, I was like, oh, this was so great because I feel like when you write kind of more serious books like Sparrow and like kind of some of the books I've written in the past, I think the humor gets kind of lost.
Yeah.
And I'm always like wanting people to say like, that was fun. Like there are funny parts in the book. Like there are funny lines. And I'm like, I want you to acknowledge that it was funny. So I feel like I got to do that in this middle grade novel, which I was like super excited about, to just get to be funny. And,
It is funny.
Thank you. And then I think also I didn't really, I did get into crushes in the book, but not with the main character, because that just really wasn't something that she was that focused on at that point. But I'm really kind of curious. I don't know if it's really an emotion, but just trying to write like a crush in middle grade, like from the main character's perspective, because I completely boy crazy. I mean, I had crushes, like 20 crushes a week, So, but I don't know, for some reason I didn't quite write about that. Didn't feel comfortable writing about that from that age.
Yeah. So. If I could circle back, I would say that, I probably would like to write a love story that doesn't go badly. You know, I mean, Sparrow's in love with this horrible guy. Lucas is in love with Sparrow. And that, you know, that's not necessarily a happy ending. It's a hopeful ending. But maybe I just want to write a straight up crush love story. I don't know. That would be fun.
I know. Can you tell me how that goes? Because I don't think I've written it.
I don't know if I could do it. I don't know.
All right. I'm going to go back here, look at the questions. Okay. From Alex Lutz. Alex says, what part of your finished book just disappeared for me. There it goes. Okay. What part of your finished book would you have least expected when you started writing the first draft? And what surprised you the most about your own book? Love that question.
That's a great question, Alex. What surprised me about my book? So Tristan surprised me. I went back and forth with him, and I even wrote like 4 or 5 chapters in his voice. My editor and I thought, I wonder what that would look like if we went there. And so I did a lot of research on sociopathic behavior, and then I wrote Tristan. And I was surprised at how easily that came to me, and I'm not sure that's a good thing. But we did not end up using that because honestly, the more I wrote in his voice, the more I realized that I really did not want him to have that much space in the book. So that surprised me. Lucas turned out to be a much more solid character. When I began the book, Lucas didn't really have his own character arc. He was more of a Greek chorus, and that's okay, but that's not all another character should be, just commenting on the major plot points. So I wrote a real life for Lucas, and that surprised me that then I ended up doing that, because Lucas was sort of tangential at the beginning, but then he turned into this fully fleshed out guy that I just fell in love with him. You know, I just love Lucas. He's so vulnerable, and he's so sweet, and he's so messed up, but he comes around, and he wears his heart on his sleeve, and I love that about him. So yeah, Lucas surprised me, and also writing sociopathic Tristan surprised me that I could do that well, and I'm not sure that was a good surprise.
Trying to think of what I was surprised by. I don't know, maybe just that like I could write this like sweet, heartwarming book where like nothing really terrible happened.
I know.
Characters, you know, I mean, and I don't think it's just because it's middle grade, because there's plenty of middle grade that tackles a lot of serious stuff, and there serious stuff that happens in my book that is, you know, kind of terrible, you know, racism. It turned out a lot. Like I just hear people say a lot that it's like so sweet and heartwarming, and I'm like, gosh, it really kind of was, and it was really refreshing to kind of write that and show that I can write about things that, you know, can make you laugh and cry happy tears and not.
Yeah, I did cry at the end. Honestly, it's so sweet, but it's so profound too, Brandy. Honestly, yeah.
Thank you.
My middle son told me after he finished Sparrow, he called me up and he said, "Mom, I'm going to tell you what your next book is about. You're going to write about a little puppy, and nothing bad ever happens to him. All right, that's your next book," because I can't take it. So, yeah.
Picture books from here.
Yeah, a little picture book. Yeah, not going to happen, honey.
I'm looking at our time just to see where we're at. Okay, we've still got time for more questions. Cool. All right. Let's see. We've answered some of these as we've been talking, so I don't want to repeat too much, but this is a really interesting one. Was there any part of your story that was taken out during the editing process that you wish was still in the book?
You know, if you had asked me about that while I was editing, I would probably say yes. But but no, no, not that there was a lot that got taken out. But my editor and I worked so beautifully together, Susan Chang. It really was such a collaborative relationship, and really, if I disagreed with something that didn't happen often, but it was not like, take this out and I say no. It was like, maybe this doesn't work. And I would say, well, what if we do this? So it wasn't a thing where she was just marking through things and taking them out. So there were things that went out, that got taken out, and then the book ended up being better. As I said before, I'm such an overwriter, and she did all the edits by hand. So I got the big manuscript with her notes in the margins, and it was kind of old school, and I loved that. And it was like having a conversation with her, because so many times she wrote, less is more, less is more, and she is right about that. Maybe in this sequence of 42 things that you've just said, maybe it really only needs to be 4 things, and so she was right about everything. She really, really was. So that's a long answer to a short question. There's nothing that I took out that I wish was still in the book.
Yeah, I love hearing your process. Because I've had the good fortune of working with, really great editors too. And I love hearing that you guys work together so beautifully, and that you just felt like it was a collaboration, more than like, a directive, like, you're going to do this and you're going to do that.
Right.
Better, because I think any great editor will just ask questions that will get you to where you are, which is how my editor works too. And it's really great. Funny that you say that your note is less is more, because the note I get from everybody, including my agent, who's super editorial, and she reads, kind of everything before we get it to a point where it's going to sell. And it's always just like, I want more of this, like, more. And then I'll get that same note from my editor. This is great, but I want more. So I kind of have to like dig it out. I don't know. It's like the strange thing where I feel like I'm withholding it first, and then it's like,
well, I had those moments too. Yeah.
I don't think there was anything that, to that point, I don't think there was anything that I feel like I had to cut that was in there. It's usually just me adding stuff.
I'm a big putter-inner. Yeah. I did add some things. There were times when she said, could you flesh this out a little bit more? But I do, when I was first drafting, I just loved the sound of my own voice. I just really thought, man, I'm killing it here. And it was just like, no, not so much.
Sure you were, but hey, we're writers, so,
What are you going to do? We write, right?
Yeah, all of us, I think.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go through these. I think take a couple more. Let's see. Okay, I don't think, well, we've sort of, let's see. Okay, well, I don't think we've necessarily talked about this. Oh, a question just popped in from another friend, Cherie Smith, also a friend of Vroman's. Cherie said, can you talk about your book covers?
Oh, I would love to talk about my book cover. So the woman who designed my book is Leslie Worrell. From Tortine and Forge. She is a brilliant artist. And in her own right, I follow her on Instagram. She came up with the concept of the feathers. And I've never spoken to her directly, but I do know that one of the things that I love about the design of the book is that each chapter begins with this feather is on, and I just think that's brilliant. So the ballerina on the cover of the book, obviously I love the white because I think it really pops, and the black, there's a little sense of ominousness. Is that a word? I guess I should know, right? And she is bowing, the ballerina is bowing, and I love that you can't see her face. I just think it's a beautiful cover. I mean, I just, when Tor sent me the cover, I burst into tears. I just thought it was just stunning. So I can take no credit for that. That's all Leslie Worrell.
It is beautiful. Did you give them, did they ask for any notes, or did you say, hey, like I would like, this, anything like that?
Nope. No, in fact, no, I didn't, and didn't at all. I just let them. They came up with one concept that was also lovely, but then in working through, I think they decided to do something a little more spare. So no, I didn't give them notes. How about you? Did you?
Not really. And I want to say that I really love your cover. Like I just keep
Thank
staring at it.
you. Thank you.
I love it. I think it's beautiful. I think ballet itself lends, so much
Oh yeah.
creative possibilities, to a beautiful
It's
cover.
so gorgeous.
They
Yeah.
killed it. Yeah. Yeah, I love this cover. So
pretty.
I have had the luck to have the same cover artist for my last several books. And her name is Erin Robinson. She goes by Brooklyn Dolly, and she is just incredible. She's a Black woman, and so I really feel like she really understands what it is to sort of illustrate Black girls. And usually my only notes are like, I don't really want a real face, face of a real person on the cover, because I just feel like that gives you less room to kind of play around as you read the book. And I'm a huge illustration fan. I love illustration, so I feel really lucky to have gotten that. But yeah, I just think she really got to the heart of these girls and just showing kind of the different ways that you can be, you can be a surfer, sporty Black girl. You can be a goth Black girl who wears, all black and leather armbands. And yeah, like the little touches you said, like there's this little seagull here on the back at the beach. Yeah. And then the little seagull is also like, in the chapter headings, which I really love. So kind of like you said, like tying those things together. But yeah, I'm not an artist, so I don't give many notes. They just kind of say, is there anything you don't want to see? Is there anything you really want to see? But I really, have had also the good fortune of having wonderful cover designers in-house at Little Brown. And so I just think the designer and the cover artist work so well together. So I'm just literally blown away every time I see the cover in my inbox. Like you, I usually end up screaming and like, how did I get this?
Yeah. I get that.
All right, I might try to take one more question from here, and then I want to ask you a couple of questions myself to end things. Let's see. Okay, I like this one. As you both wrote about deep and emotional topics, let's see, these questions as you both wrote about deep and emotional topics, what lighter things did you do outside of writing to counterbalance the seriousness of your material? That's a great question.
That's a great question, actually. Yeah. So obviously reading is a great escape for me. And so I read, I didn't read any young adult books, young adult contemporary books while I was writing, because I just don't want that in my head. But so when I was writing the assault scene, which and that wasn't the hardest scene in the book, but it was pretty hard. I found myself, I would write a couple of sentences, and then I was so upset, I would go play with, our dogs. We had dogs back then. They're both gone on now, but yeah. But so I go play with the dogs, or I would go exercise. That was a huge help for me, just getting on that treadmill and doing some miles, and going to the gym and getting out of the house and out of my head, blasting some heavy metal in my ears while I'm, So music, exercise, walking. And there were times where, you just have to put it down for a little while and watch stupid stuff on Netflix. Just the normal stuff that you do that everyone who works does to get away from their work, but I dreamed about Sparrow a lot, especially towards the end. So she was really, as I was finishing that last round of revisions, she was really, the whole book was really in my head. She was in my head, and Lucas, and they, until it was absolutely finished and turned in, we were really living together that last month or so.
Wow.
That was hard. Yeah.
Yeah. When it gets in that deep, and it's just like,
yeah, Yep.
Yeah. For me, yeah, I would say yoga, if I'm feeling like super stressed out and I just really am like really kind of discombobulated, I will break out my yoga mat and just do some yoga from YouTube here at home. I really love stand-up comedy. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, and there's a lot on Netflix that are really good, but it's kind of one of those things I've always loved since I was a kid. And I'm like, didn't everyone grow up watching stand-up comedy? So that just feels really like familiar and safe to me. And then this is like, it's not even a guilty pleasure at this point. I talk about it on almost every panel or event that I do. I am a huge Real Housewives fan.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. It's just
It's
like
so great.
my life now. I watch several franchises, several cities.
Uh-huh.
And it just, I don't know, there's something very relaxing about watching grown women scream at each other.
And throw wine at each other and turn tables over and stuff. Yeah. Yeah. I'm all about it. Bring it. Yeah.
Yeah, something about it. It's like, it makes me feel almost like a better person. Yeah, go down. So yeah, I would say like TV, yoga, stand-up comedy are kind of
Yeah.
out of it. Well, I am going to ask you just a couple of questions to
Okay.
round it out.
Okay.
Well, this is like the dreaded question that everyone always asks, so I have to ask it of you.
Uh-oh.
What's next?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I wish I knew. I think it's another young adult novel, and I started one, and it was sort of shaping up to be another really sad book. And I thought, perhaps I would have continued with that book had the pandemic not happened, had the book tour been canceled, had if everything had been normal, I probably would have written that book. So what I'm trying to do now is taking the good parts of that book and turning it into something else, but I'm not really sure what I want that to be yet. Maybe something lighter, maybe a love story. I'm also been working on an adult novel, an adult book that's an epistolary novel, all told in letters and journals. And I've always been fascinated with that. And I love reading epistolary novels because it feels like you've snuck into somebody's desk and you're reading something illicit, like you shouldn't be reading it. So I always wanted to write one. So I've been working on that for several years, and especially when Sparrow was out with my editor, I would work on that. So I sort of have two things going right now. I'm working on two things at once, which is really unusual for me because I usually am a one project kind of girl. But these are weird times, so I'm gonna go with it.
Embrace it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like a lot of people are kind of having that experience of like, what I was planning before the pandemic is now very differently and creatively.
Different. Mm-hmm.
It's just, made us think about things a lot differently too.
Yes.
Okay, and then I'm going to kind of put you on the spot. Do you have any recent YA or children's books that you've read that you would like to recommend for anyone?
Well, aside from yours, and I'm not sucking up, honestly, your books are just beautiful. So I would definitely recommend yours. There's one that I did an interview with the School Library Journal with a middle grade writer whose name is Sonia Solter. And her book came out, debuted right the week after mine came out. And she has written a middle grade novel in verse about a young girl who experiences sexual abuse. And if you had told me that somebody would write a book in verse about a middle grader who's undergone sexual abuse, I would have thought, wow, how is that going to work? It is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, beautifully done. It just is heartbreaking but hopeful. So I would definitely recommend hers. I'm trying to. Of course, I'm drawing a blank, but all of my partners, all my conversation partners, Nora Shalloway Carpenter is a wonderful writer. Meg Medina, a wonderful writer. Mercy Suarez, I just love that book. So I love contemporary YA. But if you're interested in tough themes for a middle age group, a middle grade age group, pick up Sonia Salters because it's so powerful and in verse and free verse. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah, that's on my list definitely, and I came across that interview from the two of you, which was great. So yeah,
Thanks. Yeah. What about you? What are you reading?
Let's see, what am I reading? I know it's weird. I'm a copy editor, so I feel like I'm always reading something. So it's either for work or for fun.
Yeah.
I am currently reading. It's called Strange Birds by Cecilia C. Perez, and I'm loving it. It's just like great. My mom's kind of like been really into birds forever, and I feel like as I get older, I'm sort of like really becoming into birds. So it's really cool to read about these middle grade girls who are just like into it and own it from a young age and are not like embarrassed about it like I was. Yeah, that's a great book, Strange Birds.
Okay, cool.
All right, I think that's that's a wrap on our conversation with Mary and Brandy. Thank you to everyone who joined our stream this evening. You guys are the lifeline of independent bookstores.
Yeah.
Again, we do have signed book plates available for those who want to get autographed copies of Mary and Brandy's books. And you can do so by purchasing a copy on our website. Just make sure to write book plate in the comment when you're checking your book out. Also, our bookstores are now opening up curbside pickups. So if you are interested in picking up a book from our store, yay, please do so. And we are also selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro FM and Hummingbird if you're interested in that as well. And if you'd like regular updates on upcoming events, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you again, Mary and Brandy. It was lovely having you. And
It's so great to meet you.
It was great seeing you both. All right. Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.